Breaking the Code, Times and Seasons, Part 3, Synchronism and Chronology, Paganism, Absorption of Christianity. This important study, unless otherwise indicated, is taken from the book of A.T. Jones, The Two Republics, pages 301 to 328. Introduction, Part 3, taken from the Webster Dictionary, Definition of Synchronism and Chronology. Synchronism is the chronological arrangement of historical events and personages so as to indicate coincidence or coexistence, a table showing such occurrences. Chronology is a reference work organized according to the dates of events. This study of paganism absorption of Christianity demonstrates that about 180 and onward in the West, mainly because of Rome, paganism absorbed Christianity with its calendar, feast, customs, and traditions, and sabotaged the Hebrew calendar and appointed times of worship based on Leviticus chapter 23, including Passover on Abib 14, still observed in the East by the followers of Christ. It demonstrates also a calendar of a different order and not Sunday only, as caused Christianity to shift from the true Sabbath of creation based on the luni-solar barley harvest calendar to a Sunday or Saturday keeping solar Julian base calendar of 46 BC and a Gregorian solar base calendar of 1582 and an Easter lunar equinox based calendar and Pascha 15 instead of the Passover on the 14. It demonstrates the dual application of Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 and Revelation chapter 13, starting with the Sunday law under the Emperor of Rome Constantine in 321 AD to the universal Sunday law and death decree enacted by Rome and apostate Protestantism in the near future. Synchronism and Chronology from the year 321 AD to 1929. The first synchronism is taken from the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 25, which in the New American Bible is translated as, "Ye shall think to change the feast days and the law," and in the Moffat Bible, "Ye shall plan to alter the sacred seasons and the law." The Julian year, 321 AD, on the 7th of the 3rd month. The event, first Sunday law enacted by Emperor Constantine using the Julian calendar. This is quoted from the History of the Christian Church by Philip Schaff, Volume 3, page 380, 7 volume. The first Sunday law issued Tuesday, March 7, on the year 321 AD, speaks about Sunday only as the venerable day of the sun, a title purely heathen, like the second day was dedicated to the moon, Monday. They emphasize the creation of light and the resurrection of the Son of Justice, nowhere commanded or even spoken of in the Bible. What follows is the translated wording of the first Sunday law. Let all the judges and townspeople and the occupations of all trade rest on the venerable day of the sun. Nevertheless, let those who are situated in the rural districts freely and with full liberty attend to the cultivation of the fields, because it frequently happens that no other day may be so fitting for sowing grains and planting vines, lest the critical moment being let slip, men should lose the commodities granted by heaven. Given on the nones of March, Crispus and Constantine being consuls, each of them for the second time. Thus Constantine played into the hands of the ambitious bishops what they coveted, the use of the state for the furtherance of their aims. This new pagan system ended the bishops in time the external power to compel man to accept their decrees and submit to the dictates of the church. The very next day, Constantine enacted another law giving pagan soothsayers official acceptance in the empire. In all, Constantine issued 5 additional Sunday laws over a few years to strengthen the first one. Second Synchronism, taken from the 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, excerpts, that men of sin be revealed, who exalted himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he is as God seated in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The Julian year is 325 AD, on the 7th of the 3rd month. The event is the decree of Nicaea to implement Easter and by extension Sunday worship, which in time became the mark of authority of the Roman Catholic Church, using the Julian Gregorian solar calendar and a lunar equinox-based calendar. Easter. Although the Christian festival of Easter celebrates the torture and death of Jesus on the cross and especially his alleged resurrection, and has links to the Jewish Passover, most people, including Christians, unknowingly celebrate its pagan influences, including the bunny, a symbol of fertility, and colored eggs, representing the sunlight of spring. It took over 300 years before Christians established the date of Easter as the first Sunday after the full moon, following the March equinox at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, or our era. The pagan Easter, however, was celebrated long before Christianity, although the festival went by many names. In the 8th century, Christian scholar Bede claimed in his book De Temporum Ratione, The Reckoning of Time, that Easter derived from the Saxon Östre, or Easter. The ancient Saxons in northern Europe worshipped the goddess Östre at the time of the spring equinox. The goddess Easter represents the sunrise, springtime, and fertility, the renewal of life. Pagan Anglo-Saxons made offering of colored eggs to her at the vernal equinox. They placed them at graves specially, probably as a charm of rebirth. Egyptian and Greeks were also known to place eggs at grave sites. Only later did the Christians pilfer the name for themselves and grafted their religion onto a pagan celebration. Vernal spring equinox. The early Romans used a lunar calendar in which months alternated between 29 and 30 days. The calendar produced inaccuracies because it gradually fell out of step with the seasons, because it did not use the barley. Julius Caesar reformed the calendar by switching its base from lunar to solar. The Romans established the day on which the vernal equinox occurred as March 25th. The length of the year got fixed at 365 days, with an additional leap year day added every 4 years. This made the average length of a year equal to 365.25 days, which came fairly close to the actual value of 365.2422 days. The astronomical vernal equinox occurs when night and day appear nearly the same length at around March 21st and establishes the first day of spring in the northern hemisphere. The moment the sun crosses directly over the Earth's equator marks the vernal equinox. In the southern hemisphere, the moment equals the autumnal equinox. Translated literally, vernal means spring. and equinox means equal night, because the sun sits above the equator and day and night appear equal in length. Taken from the online Wikipedia Encyclopedia. The third synchronism from Jeremiah chapter 10 verses 1 to 5 excerpts. For the custom of the people are vain. One cutted a tree out of the forest and decked it with silver and with gold. The Julian year 354 AD. On the 25th of the 12th month, based on a winter solar solstice calendar. The event, the earliest known reference to it, commemorating the birth of Christ on December 25th or Christmas, is in the Roman Philocalian calendar of AD 354. How did Christmas come to be celebrated on December 25th? A. Roman pagans first introduced the holiday of Saturnalia, a week-long period of lawlessness celebrated between December 17 to 25th. During this period, Roman courts were closed and Roman law dictated that no one could be punished for damaging property or injuring people during the week-long celebration. The festival began when Roman authorities chose an enemy of the Roman people to represent the Lord of Misrule. Each Roman community selected a victim whom they forced to indulge in food and other physical pleasures throughout the week. At the festival's conclusion, December 25th, Roman authorities believed that they were destroying the forces of darkness by brutally murdering this innocent man or woman. B. The ancient Greek writer, poet, and historian Lucian, in his dialogue entitled Saturnalia, describes the festival observance in his time. In addition to human sacrifice, he mentions these customs: widespread intoxication, going from house to house while singing naked, rape and other sexual license, and consuming human-shaped biscuits still produced in some English and most German bakeries during the Christmas season. C. In the 4th century of our era, Christianity imported the Saturnalia festival, hoping to take the pagan masses in with it. Christian leaders succeeded in converting to Christianity large numbers of pagans by promising them that they could continue to celebrate the Saturnalia as Christians. D. The problem was that there was nothing intrinsically Christian about Saturnalia. To remedy this, these Christian leaders named Saturnalia's concluding day, December 25th, to be Jesus' birthday. E. Christians had little success, however, refining the practices of Saturnalia. As Stephen Nissenbaum, professor of history at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, writes, in return for ensuring massive observance of the anniversary of the Savior's birth by assigning it to its resonant date, the Church, for its part, tacitly agreed to allow the holiday to be celebrated more or less the way it had always been. The earliest Christmas holidays were celebrated by drinking, sexual indulgence, singing naked in the streets, a precursor of modern caroling. F. The Reverend Increase Matter of Boston observed in 1687 that the early Christians who first observed the Nativity on December 25th did not do so thinking that Christ was born in that month, but because the heathens' Saturnalia was at the time kept in Rome, and they were willing to have those pagan holidays metamorphosed into Christian ones. Because of its known pagan origin, Christmas was banned by the Puritans and its observance was illegal in Massachusetts between 1659 and 1681, However, Christmas was and still is celebrated by most Christians. Continuing with the Wikipedia Encyclopedia, G. Some of the most depraved customs of the Saturnalia Carnival were intentionally revived by the Catholic Church in 1466 when Pope Paul II, for the amusement of his Roman citizens, forced Jews to race naked through the streets of the city. An eyewitness account reports, before they were to run, the Jews were richly fed so as to make the race more difficult for them and at the same time more amusing for spectators. They ran amid Rome's taunting shrieks and peals of laughter, while the Holy Father stood upon a richly ornamented balcony and laughed heartily. H. As part of the Saturnalia Carnival throughout the 18th and 19th centuries of our era, rabbis of the ghetto in Rome were forced to wear clownish outfits and march through the city streets to the jeers of the crowd, pelted by a variety of missiles. When the Jewish community of Rome sent a petition in 1836 to Pope Gregory XVI, begging him to stop the annual Saturnalia abuse of the Jewish community, he responded, "It is not opportune to make any innovation." On December 25, 1881, Christian leaders whipped the Polish masses into anti-Semitic frenzies that led to riots across the country. In Warsaw, 12 Jews were brutally murdered, huge numbers maimed, and many Jewish women were raped. 2 million rubles worth of property was destroyed. Germany is credited with starting the Christmas tree tradition as we know now in the 16th century when devout Christians brought decorated trees into their homes. Some built Christmas pyramids of wood and decorated them with evergreen and candles if wood was scarce. Fourth Synchronism from Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time, making up the 1260 days of years. The Julian Gregorian years of 538 to 1798 represent these 1260 days of years. The event, for its first 300 years, the Catholic Church was persecuted and unrecognized, unable to hold or transfer property. Early congregations met in rooms set aside for that purpose in the homes of well-to-do individuals, and a number of early churches, known as titular churches, and located on the outskirts of ancient Rome, were held as property by individuals rather than by the church itself. This system began to change during the reign of the Emperor Constantine I, who made Christianity legal within the Roman Empire. The Lateran Palace was the first significant donation to the church, most probably a gift from Constantine himself. While the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, who reigned from 306 to 337, Christianity began to transition to the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. Historians remain uncertain about Constantine's reasons for favoring Christianity, and theologians and historians have argued about which form of early Christianity he subscribed to. Although Constantine had been exposed to Christianity by his mother Helena, there is no consensus among scholars as to whether he adopted his mother's Christianity in his youth or at all. Constantine saw himself as an emperor of the Christian people. If this made him a Christian is the subject of debate, and he did not receive baptism until shortly before his death. Constantine's decision to cease the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire was a turning point for early Christianity, sometimes referred to as the triumph of the Church, the Peace of the Church, or the Constantinian Shift. In 313, Constantine and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, decriminalizing Christian worship. The emperor became a great patron of the church and set a precedent for the position of the Christian emperor within the church and the notion of orthodoxy, Christendom, ecumenical councils, and the state church of the Roman Empire declared by edict in 380. He is revered as a saint and is apostolos in the Eastern Orthodox Church and Oriental Orthodox Church for his example as a Christian monarch. Other donations followed, primarily in mainland Italy, but also in the provinces of the Roman Empire. But the Church held all of these lands as a private landowner, not as a sovereign entity. When in the 5th century, the Italian peninsula passed under the control of Odoacer and later the Ostrogoths, the church organization in Italy, with the Pope at its head, submitted to their sovereign authority while asserting their spiritual primacy over the whole church. The seeds of the Papal States as a sovereign political entity were planted in the 6th century. The Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire in Constantinople launched a reconquest of Italy and took decades and devastated Italy's political and economic structures. Just as these wars wound down, the Lombards entered the peninsula from the north and conquered much of the countryside. By the 7th century, Byzantine authority was largely limited to a diagonal band running roughly from Ravenna, where the emperor's representative or exarch was located, to Rome and south to Naples, called the Rome-Ravenna corridor, plus coastal enclaves. With effective Byzantine power weighted at the northeast end of this territory, the Pope, as the largest landowner and most prestigious figure in Italy, began by default to take on much of the ruling authority that Byzantines were unable to project to the area around the city of Rome. While the popes remained Byzantine subjects, in practice the Duchy of Rome, an area roughly equivalent to modern-day Latium, became an independent state ruled by the Pope. Pope Vigilius was Pope from the 29th of March 537 to his death in 555. He is considered the first Pope of the Byzantine papacy, though preceded by 58 popes since the 1st century AD, including the Apostle Peter as believed by the Roman Catholic Church. The Byzantine Empire, alternatively known as the Eastern Roman Empire, was the predominantly Greek-speaking Eastern half continuation and remainder of the Roman Empire during late antiquity and the Middle Ages. Its capital city was Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, originally founded as Byzantium. It survived the fragmentation and fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD and continued to exist for an additional 1,000 years until it fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. The capture of Constantinople and 2 other Byzantine splinter territories soon thereafter marked the end of the Roman Empire, an imperial state which had lasted for nearly 1,500 years. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople also dealt a massive blow to Christendom, as the Ottoman armies thereafter were free to advance into Europe without an adversary to their rear. Constantinople had been an imperial capital since its consecration in 330 under Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. The Papal States were territories in the Italian peninsula under the sovereign direct rule of the Pope from the 700s until 1870. They were among the major states of Italy from roughly the 8th century until the Italian peninsula was unified in 1861 by the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. At their zenith, they covered most of the modern Italian region of Lazio, which includes Rome, Marche, Umbria, and Romagna, as well as portions of Emilia. These holdings were considered to be a manifestation of the temporal power of the Pope, as opposed to his ecclesiastical primacy. After 1861, the Papal States, reduced to Lazio, continued to exist until 1870. The French Revolution proved as disastrous for the temporal territories of the papacy as it was for the Roman Church in general. In 1791, the Comtat Venaissin and Avignon were annexed by France. Later, with the French invasion of Italy in 1796, the legations were seized and became part of the revolutionary Cisalpine Republic. 2 years later, in 1798, the Papal States as a whole were invaded by French forces who declared a Roman Republic. Pope Pius VI died in exile in Valence, France in 1799. The Papal States were restored in June 1800 and Pope Pius VII returned, but the French again invaded in 1808, and this time the remainder of the states of the Church were annexed to France, forming the Département of Tibre and Trasimène. With the fall of the Napoleonic system in 1814, the Papal States were restored once more. From 1814 until the death of Pope Gregory XVI in 1846, the popes followed a reactionary policy in the Papal States. For instance, the city of Rome maintained the last Jewish ghetto in Western Europe. There were hopes that this would change when Pope Pius IX was elected to succeed Gregory and began to introduce liberal reforms. Between 1870 and 1929, the Pope had no physical territory at all. Eventually, Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini solved the crisis between modern Italy and the Vatican, and in 1929, the Vatican city-state was granted sovereignty. Conclusion to part number 3. According to A.T. Jones in his book, The Two Republics, pages 301 to 328, which we have used in part 3, the Sunday law enacted by Constantine in 321 AD and followed by more Sunday laws furthered the plans of the bishops of Rome to establish a theocracy government in imitation of Israel's theocracy, which existed till Israel demanded a king under Samuel's rules as a judge. After God granted their request, the theocracy was dissolved. At his third coming, Christ will establish his kingdom on earth, and a new theocracy will be set up to last forever. This is referring to First Samuel chapter 8. B. Rome is wanting to establish a day of rest in imitation of the act of God in the original theocracy in instituting the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath of rest, referring to Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. C. The bishops of Rome intend to establish an imitation of the kingdom of God on earth. The laws, being laws of the kingdom of God, would necessarily have a religious character by supplying a day of rest to the purposes of devotion for prayers, supplications, and worship on the Lord's Day. The bishops of Rome also intend to establish D. It was by virtue of his office and authority as Pontifex Maximus, or Sovereign Pontiff, and not as Emperor, that the day was set apart to this use, because it was the sole prerogative of the Pontifex Maximus in the pagan world to appoint holy days in imitation of the sovereign of the universe. The title Pontifex Maximus, or Sovereign Pontiff, has been used by the bishops of Rome for centuries. And at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Sunday movement gained impetus when it was decreed that Easter would be celebrated on Sunday only and followed by the whole empire. In Socrates' Ecclesiastical History, Book 1, Chapter 9, a letter confirmed this action of the council. It was again an imitation of the power of the sovereign of the universe to change the times and seasons, corresponding to Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. Following the Council of Laodicea around 363 to 364 AD, the Roman Catholic Church secured the power in later years to enforce the observance of Sunday and the abandonment of the seven-day Sabbath. In nothing did Constantine give the Church any such a power except in the Sunday law. Again quoted from A.T. Jones, in this way the Church received help from the state for the furtherance of her ends. Taken from Neander, History of the Christian Religion of the Church, Section 3rd, Part 2, Division 3, Part 5. This again was an imitation of Israel theocracy when she was fully under God's government and was to depend on a divine king before she demanded an earthly king. In imitation, the bishops of Rome made themselves dependent of the Emperor Constantine to use the power of the state for the furtherance of their aims. A.T. Jones rightly concludes on page 328 that the Roman Catholic Church started out with a determination to do it, she did it, and in this way she did it. And the theocratical leaders in the movement had the cruel courage to follow the steps unto the last, as illustrated in the horrors of the Inquisition during the fearful record of the dreary ages in which the bishopric of Rome was supreme over kings and nations. The imitation of the judgment hour is the Inquisition. Although set to imitate the King of the universe, the Roman Catholic Church's despotic power, which lasted from 538 till 1798, as demonstrated in Section 4, does not imitate the King of the universe. Christ is still long-suffering towards his wayward subjects and is patiently finishing his work in the most holy place, hoping that none should perish, but everyone should come to the knowledge of the everlasting gospel expressed in Revelation 14. He longs for everyone to take heed of the true worship time he has established through his prophet and the work he is presently finishing in the most holy place in the sanctuary above, with the judgment of the righteous dead, and soon no man knows when the judgment will pass to the living. Additional synchronisms and chronological facts will be presented in parts 4 to 8.